within these photographs, and they're all stories about migration and arriving and coming and going. These stories very similar to my transporter story, but these are people from all over the world. And we captured a lot of these in the San Diego International Airport. And a lot of this was through applying for grants, by the way, just to keep it like bring it back to reality. All this costs money, obviously, but I began to apply to things. I started like looking for, researching for funding, and literally submitting applications, which I've applied for so many, and I've only got I've missed the most. You know, I've gotten only a handful of the ones I've ever applied for. But that's the reality of getting funding, you know, just applying for stuff, and I started pushing a little bit more out there. And when I started doing that, through this process of doing this kind of work, I met an artist. Her name's Rebecca Goldschmidt. She's from Chicago. She's German, Filipina, and also spoke Spanish, like the Tijuanero. I thought she was Mexican when I met her. And she started asking me about how I lived my life, like as a person from Tijuana who would cross the border every day, go and come back, like what was that like? And she thought that it was super interesting, the fact that I crossed the border every day, that I had been doing it since I was 5 years old. She thought it was like amazing and that it was the weirdest thing in the world. To me, it was like super simple and boring. I was like, wait, that's not cool, like whatever, no? Not interested in that kind of stuff. And she wanted us to apply for a grant from this was the first grant that we ever got. It was from the California Arts Council also. And she wanted us to apply for a grant to document stories at the border. No, so she kind of gave me an idea. I wasn't sure. If I wanted to do it. I didn't feel like it was a topic that was neither interesting or, I didn't think it was interesting or that anybody would care. Like that, I was completely wrong. I'm here right now. Like I never thought this, it was gonna happen the way it did. We applied for the BorderClick grant, for the California Arts Council grant, and that's when I came up with the name BorderClick. I was writing down a bunch of names, like, what am I gonna call this thing? What am I gonna call this thing? And I thought about border and then click because you click with a camera. It was easy, border, click. And this project, well, I'm gonna jump now to you can see some of the stuff that I've done here. We'll show you a little bit more of this later. Part of my last installation, but this doesn't matter at this point. So, this is where BorderClick comes in. So, BorderClick, we pitched it originally as an archive of transporter students. People who cross the border every day. So what was the idea? Get a camera, give it to a student, he crosses the border every day, take photos every day of anything. Every day. You can take a photo in the border, on your way to school, on your way from school, what happens in between. We wanted to understand that. I had my experience, so we wrote a curriculum. Rebecca is very academic, and she was helping me kind of like she was giving me language that I didn't have. This academic language that I didn't understand. But I had the lived experience, which is something that I want you all to understand. This is something that was so difficult for me because at that moment it was difficult because of the self-confidence and how I felt about being an artist and how I felt about not being academic, not having this language. I felt like I couldn't navigate that space. I felt like I could navigate like this artist space with the help of somebody like Shinpei who would help me kind of like, he was my mentor, he was leading the space for me. And most of the projects that I've ever done have been collaborative. I've done some stuff on myself, but most of the things I do on myself, I keep them to myself. When I work with other people, I do other things. And working with people make things much bigger. So when I was trying to understand this like academic language that Rebecca was giving me and having my lived experience, she would tell me like, yo, like your lived experience is way more than what any academic can ever tell you. There's a difference between theory and there's a difference between practice. There's so much theory out there. You're gonna get a lot of theory out there. But if you're not practicing your theory in the most simplest forms, and I'm gonna show you the way I started doing it simply. I was literally just like walking around taking photos of something I did every day in my life, which was to cross the border. Something that I thought was so unimportant. And I was just doing it, just taking photos of anything. I did study photography or whatever, but I've never considered myself. It's really hard for me to consider myself a photographer because I have friends who are photographers who carry a camera. I guess we all carry cameras now with our phones, but who carry like professional cameras everywhere they go. I'm not that type of photographer. When I bring a camera, it's because I'm gonna shoot something that I know I'm gonna capture. I'm very specific like that. I'm gonna get something, I'm looking for it, and I go find it, and I go do it. That's more of my style. But she gave me this understanding that I had this lived experience that was worth talking about. It was worth trying to understand it, and that other people would want to understand it too. We applied to the grant, we got the grant, we wrote a whole curriculum based around my lived experience. This was a curriculum that had, originally it was supposed to be like 12 sessions, and we ended up doing like way more than 12 sessions. It expanded by a lot when we announced that we had this project where we basically said like, are you transfronterizo? Do you cross the border every day? Do you like photography? That was like the first flyer we sent out. Bunch of people hit us up, way more than we thought. Maybe 20 people. There was like, I think there was like 50 something people in the first session. Were you in the first session?
Of course.
Yeah, right. You were in the first. Yeah, there's like 50 something people in the first session. I was like, damn, wow, this is way more than we thought. So based on that, we wrote a curriculum. And we did our first, which was the Artist Activity Communities. That was the name of the grant. That was 2016, 2017. And you can see the people who participated in the final iteration of what it was, because people would come in and out, which BorderClick was open for everybody. Like it wasn't. We call it a living archive. So BorderClick, we ended up calling it this living archive of the transport experience, and we say living because it's constantly changing. It's not like a fixed. It's not fixed, not completely fixed. And we wanted to use photography initially, and then we started seeing this lived archive being more than just photography. People were coming up with much more creative ideas of how to talk about the border, and while we were doing this type of work, we started to experiment. These images that you see right here, and we have some printed for later if you guys want to see them up close. These were some of the final images that a lot of participants through the sessions came up with, you know? Like, one of the things that we talked about was like, how can you talk about the border without actually showing the wall? Like, how can you talk about it without showing the wall? Think about it, be more conceptual. And we did talk a lot about technique, photo technique, we did teach photo technique, but we wanted to experience that. So, I mean, if you see this photograph, if I didn't tell you it was about the border, would you think it's about the border? But right, you see it now, and like, does it make sense if I tell you this photograph talks about the border? Can you see that? Can you see that narrative? What about this photograph? A couple more, you can see the landscapes. We have a whole team about landscapes. Here's some of the ones that are part of the permanent collection. My favorite one was about landscapes, because one of the first photographies was one of the first cameras that was ever used in the West. And by I mean the West was when when the 49ers came to California looking for gold. One of the first uses of the camera was to document how big and open the landscape was, because they were trying to sell land. That's how it started, which they still do to this day. So if you look at the first photographs of the West are like the whole border, Mexico, California, all of that, Arizona, and those photographs were used to sell land that was stolen, obviously. But we didn't necessarily talk about that as much. We would use art first to understand what we were looking at, and then kind of like what you were saying, Vanessa, how can art be used without, you can kind of use art to get under the message without people. The good thing about art to communicate a message, back a little bit, is that when people think of art, you kind of bring down that barrier. When you tell somebody, hey man, I'm gonna tell you about activism and about the way how you stole this land, they're gonna block you off quickly. Like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. Not even, you won't even get funding if you get really, you gotta also be careful with the way you use your language for funding. They won't give you money if they see that you're too radicalized. So use art, use photography. I show this to any funder and they get, this is amazing, but they don't know what the real message is, or they didn't really know the things that we talked about in these workshops, which we recorded everything, but also there's a lot of things that we didn't make public because, well, we don't want to expose people. Because we have folks who were undocumented, folks who had different living situations, so we were careful about that, but we were using art as a way to also understand, and in a way, without saying it to the participants or to the audience, we were hoping to radicalize them and have them understand a little bit more what's going on. So this is some documentation of the workshop. This is Rebecca, Vanessa right there. That's me, very long hair. You kind of see the intensity, of the people's faces in these sessions, but also people having fun and laughing. We had so many sessions, we talked about so many things. We talked about our bodies in the border, what that meant. Like I said, we talked a lot about landscapes, which is one of my favorite topics. We talked about abstract images, how to abstract the border, which was also something that we thought a lot about, like what I mentioned, how do you see the border without, how do you show the border without showing the wall? So abstract, how do you take it out and grab these elements to show work? So we were experimenting. Like there wasn't a fixed way to do it. And I think there isn't a fixed way to do art. I really believe that there's methodologies behind everything, but when you begin to experiment and be free, or try to be free with what you're doing to some degree, you start to create a lot of things that you maybe never thought would happen. Like I said, I never thought that this was gonna happen, so we were just experimenting, writing a curriculum that was based on my lived experience, and at the same time, we were feeding it with the information of other folks that were giving us ideas. Like Vanessa gave us a bunch of ideas on, she was super helpful, like right away. Vanessa right away stood out from the group, and she hey, I'm trying to do this stuff too. I'm studying all this. Like, how can I help you guys make this better? So we would change the curriculum as we went to support the needs of the folks that they were with us, So you can see like a little more of the workshops and kind of one of the first photographs that we took of that cohort. And I'm going to show you some of the work that we were doing inside of BorderClick, and hopefully this will make some sense to y'all. So this is the portfolio that we have, and through those workshops we did, for example, this was one of the, Vanessa, by the way, let me know where I'm at with time, I don't know.
We would like to open up Q&A at least at 9.
At 9?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're good?
Just so we can be out by 9:15.
For sure. Okay, so this was one of the projects that we all worked on, one of the activities that we did. So these symbolic paper abstracts. So these were the things that together we wrote symbols of our transport identities and crumbled, transformed, manipulated the paper in which we write on. The idea is to abstract the border. Like I said, something so concrete and definitive in our lives. What does it look like when you think about it differently? Something much more than a wall, than an international border. Borders exist everywhere, in our minds, at work, and at school. How do we deconstruct and transform these borders? So we did this exercise where we literally grabbed paper and abstracted, folded, ripped it, put it inside a live box and took a photo. Where are you going? And I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that was written in there that was where we didn't read it for ourselves, but the photographs were there. So these are some of the exercises that we were doing together. This is literally just paper. Just paper, folded paper, crumbled. And this photograph right here, where is it? Was one. Yeah, this one was one of my favorite ones. Something so beautiful about it. I don't know what it is. It's the way the shadow hits it, maybe. But these were the concepts that we were thinking of as we talked about the border and trying to understand what the border was like. So once we started doing this work and getting very intense with it in these rooms, we started talking a lot about the injustices of what was happening at that time. At the end of that semester, if you want to call it a semester, we had this exhibition that we called ¿A dónde vas? The idea of ¿A dónde vas?, the question of ¿A dónde vas?, is a question that we all get asked all the time when you cross the border. ¿A dónde vas? Well, where are you going? So ¿A dónde vas?, we conceptualized these backpacks. Every single backpack represents a different participant from BorderClick, and every single backpack has a photograph of their work printed on it. It's pretty straightforward, I think. A backpack, photo, students, right? I hope so. Kind of like, I think art, in a way, can be very simple, but once you put it in a gallery or in a wall, like it becomes art. Like this is just a backpack. If I show you the backpack, you're like, oh, it's a backpack, whatever. You put it in a gallery, you put it on a wall, boom, it's art. That's how museums and galleries work. Does anybody know Marcel Duchamp? Ever heard of Marcel Duchamp? Well, they call him the father of contemporary art, and he had this idea, this theory. He would say that art was art when the artist said, this is art. I'm telling you this is art because I'm the artist, not because you, the audience, is telling me, oh, this is not art, this is not. And he's like, I'm gonna prove it to you. So he literally grabbed a toilet, flipped it over, and put it in a gallery. Somebody stole it. Yeah. So nobody knows where the original piece is. And they called him the father of contemporary art. That was his theory. Like, you put anything in a gallery, because I'm telling you it's art, it becomes art. So this is when this kind of stuff started happening. So this is a form of contemporary art. Back there, put it on a wall and tell you it's art, it's art. You kind of see a little bit more, but this is there too, look. Gets a little bit more of the scale of the work and kind of like the beautiful photographs. And a lot of these photographs are not taken with professional cameras. Yeah, a lot of these are just from the phone. That's something that we also talked a lot about, like about the tools. We were talking about this earlier, about the tools, like that people are like, oh man, you need a professional camera to be a photographer. That's not true. That's not true. That's something very, I don't know, I always had an issue with that because like I would go to spaces where there was like all these so-called photographers and everybody was like, especially the men, who's got the biggest lens, like, oh, check out my lens, like blah, 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 showing off, and I'm like, oh man, like, and I'd be like, okay, cool, like, yeah, I don't have these kind of crazy instruments. But I did have an idea and I had a lot of passion. So I figured it out and like I said, a lot of these photographs are literally from a phone. You just need to have an idea and look, this is a screenshot from Google, like of the border. This is one of my favorites actually. And that's, we put it on a backpack, it's art. You gotta conceptualize and think about it, no? And we did some work around with 360 cameras. We filmed a lot of our experiences with 360 cameras, just anything that we wanted. It was open and free. And I haven't uploaded those online, but I want to someday. I just have to edit them, just so much content. And this is the day that we had our final exhibit for the first time that we ever worked together. And during that time, we got another grant that was also from the California Arts Council. Sorry, this was from California Humanities. And it was a grant where we took the work that we made and took it to different spaces, different gallery spaces, community spaces, to show what had been done. And we wanted to bring people from different communities as well, and put them together in the same space to have a conversation. So we had folks from Border Angels and people from CBP in the same room looking at the photographs, talking about them. We workshopped and kind of what we were mentioning, like we were using art in a way to talk about these super heavy conversations and confront the people who are doing the injustices, but it's all through art. So they bring their guard down. So how do you have a person from CBP who's probably who for sure was super racist, because I heard his wife say some crazy racist stuff in the workshop. And she was at the same time with the director, Enrico Morones, who's no longer the director of Border Angels. They were like in the same room, and then one guy was like super angry at the other one. But we used a system that was called the Bohm Circle. Bohm was actually a physicist, but he created this workshop style process where you put people in the same room and you help them have conversations without them having conflict. How do you manage that? So that was the style that we used at that moment. We did a couple of workshops with a couple of folks. And during that time, I started seeing a lot of reactions from people that were in these rooms. Advocates, key stakeholders in making change. And there was I remember there was a lot of, there was one of the CDP officers who, I hate CDP, by the way. I hate ICE, I hate all these people. But they're also in the room. And one of the guys who was there, he was black, I remember. And it's important to me because he was very, and I make sure to mention his race because it was super important, the way he saw the images and the way the person he came with was his boss, was a white guy, a racist white guy who came with his wife, the way they talked about the work. And I remember this guy coming up to me and telling me, yo man, I had never heard this word transporter before. I had no idea so many students cross the border every day. And he works in the border. Like, bro, how did you not see that? Like, at least in my head, I was like, why don't you see that? And then I was like, shit, like, not everybody sees the world the way I do. Especially when we're like put in these different positions, and these different ideas are brought, and that's when I started seeing, okay, this is how art can have an actual effect on a person, actually make change on the one-on-one level. Trying to change the border through like the global lens and these big companies, it's never gonna happen. It's just not gonna happen. And I don't want to break anybody's heart, but we were talking about this too. And I was telling this to one of Alejandro, one of my partners, great person, great artist as well. We had a whole very passionate conversation, and I told him like, yo, bro, like, you're gonna burn yourself out trying to change what's happening at the border. And he's like, nah, man, like, things need to change, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, bro, this conflict at the border is gonna keep happening long before you're dead. It's been happening and it's gonna keep happening. This happens on a global scale, something so large that I don't think we can even understand how big it actually is. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to make part of my life's work to understand how big the world. It's war. It's all whatever. I'm going on another path, but at that moment I was speaking to the CBP officer. I understood, and this also happened to me when I was crossing the border with these backpacks. So I got these backpacks made in Tijuana. I bought them. They were Chinese. I bought them like una paca así grande. And I got them all printed. I got everything printed in Tijuana, and then we sold it in Tijuana. And when I was crossing the border, I was like, I hope they don't pull me over because there's so many backpacks. They're probably gonna think I'm trying to sell them, and then they're gonna like send me to secondary inspection or send me back. And I remember I had to like go install the same day. And I remember them seeing, like, so the CBP officer, like, they come, I have a lot of these backpacks, and one of them is like, what? And they're like, he's like, what is this? I'm like, oh, there's backpacks. I'm like, they're for my students. Like, your students? Do you teach? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, I'm an artist, blah, blah, blah. You're an artist? This is art? And I was like, yeah, man, it's an art piece. And then so I was like, oh my God, they're gonna send me back. They think this, and he told me like, are you selling these? He's like, no, I'm not. Like, why do you have so many? And I was like, well, dude, like, and I was like, dude, you think anybody's gonna try to buy this? But they were brand new. So yeah, he didn't believe me. And then he brings in his supervisor. Where's that photograph? Damn, I don't think it's here. So he brought in his supervisor to see, actually this one, that's actually here. I want you to see it. Okay, so this one, don't click it. Well, you see what's right there, right? Can you see? It says SETA. You guys know this newspaper, SETA? There's a photograph of Donald Trump and Peña Nieto, the president during that time, shaking hands. And that was like right at the top of all the backpacks. And he brings a supervisor, white guy, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's probably super racist. He's gonna send me back for sure. Once he sees, he's gonna be super pissed. And then he looks at it, and he's like, oh, blah, blah, like backpacks. And I was like, yeah. And then he's like, what is this? And he looked at me, and I'm like, oh, it's an art piece. And he looks at them and was like, wait, so do you make these? And I was like, no, my students make these. Like, really? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, wow, these are really cool. And he's like, yeah, dude, go ahead. I was like, oh, shit. And he asked me like what they were about. And I told him, it's about these trans-border students, la, la, la. And I had a moment, one-on-one, also with a CBP officer at the border explaining, I was giving him a personal exhibition of the work in my car, Like, that wouldn't happen anywhere else. Only at that moment at the border because I had those backpacks on there with me. That wasn't gonna happen in a gallery, in a big museum. It was never gonna happen, but it happened at the border. And to me, that's also a moment as an artist that I was like, this is when art actually happens, is on the one-on-one. It's not in these gallery spaces. A lot of these gallery spaces are not even for us. Like I've done exhibits for BorderClick where everybody in the audience has, which I guess it's good to some degree, but a lot of these spaces are not meant for my community or made for us. And in a way, we were trying to get into these spaces, but I have a thing with institutions because I got kicked out of so many of them that I kind of hate them a little bit, even though they're the ones who pay for the funding sometimes. But so yeah, that's something that I wanted to make clear about, like these moments where I started seeing art actually having a real life function and working, having what I felt would have been a deeper impact with these people that like I said, they would have never had this conversation with anybody else, anywhere else. They're not gonna go out of their way to, the CBP officer was never gonna go to a museum to look at the work. Or if you tell them about trans-border students, he would care less. But at that moment, I had this space and I had the opportunity to talk to them, so I said as much as I could in a way that they could understand, and I hope they never forget these encounters. So